Hey, it's Tech. Welcome to Off the Cuff. Today, we're going to be talking about Wi-Fi, and I want to get right into it. And to be clear, I want to talk specifically about Wi-Fi routers and the hardware aspect of Wi-Fi, not the software and the protocols and all the other, fancy communication things. We can cover that at a different time if you really want. Let me know in the comments. It's tedious to go through, but we can do that. Up to you. Anyway, we're going to be talking about the actual hardware, and at the end, hopefully answer the question about where you should put your Wi-Fi router in your house and how to plan for that. So first, I want to cover what Wi-Fi is. I mean, that kind of sounds stupid because it's so prevalent in our culture and our understanding at this point that we kind of all know what Wi-Fi is. It's wireless networking, right? Well, Wi-Fi is actually a specific trademark of the Wireless Alliance, okay? And it's an implementation of the IEEE 802.11x standards of wireless networking. What it means is that home networking for computers over radio frequencies is covered by or covered in the 802.11 standards, and the Wi-Fi Alliance, which is pretty much all Wi-Fi manufacturers, own the trademark for that. So it's a great brand name that allows you to know that you're getting a product of quality, theoretically quality. I'm not going to go into like all of the different aspects of like what's A, B, C, not C, A, B, G, N, AC, a bunch of other letters and what all those mean. But I do want to cover that with Wi-Fi, there are two specific bands. So the earliest Wi-Fi's used the 2.4 gigahertz radio frequency ranges. They had 11 channels with like 20 megahertz approximately of bandwidth each, and that limited the maximum speed. So more recently, the more recent standards of, I think, starting N onwards, maybe G, they've been into the 5 gigahertz range, and starting at around 5 gigahertz, moving up towards 5.7. The 2.4 gigahertz band was a lot more restricted. It was only 2.4 to 2.5 gigahertz. So there was a lot of overlap and more channel interference as well. So these modern standards are better, but you have to make sure that all your devices support it as well. The higher frequency radio waves are smaller and can carry more data, but also attenuate a lot faster. I'm going to talk about what attenuation means later. And there's less ambient interference. Like microwaves for your kitchen operate near the 2.4 gigahertz band, so they can actually interfere with your Wi-Fi signals. Surprise. Most routers that you buy today are going to be dual band routers. So a dual band router can broadcast on both frequencies, usually at the same time. So it's going to broadcast one Wi-Fi network at the 2.4 gigahertz frequency and one at the 5 gigahertz frequency. Single band routers can only do one or the other, and they'll let you know on the box like what the limits are. Most modern routers can actually do like 3 or more bands, but you're going to be paying a pretty high premium for them. There is an advantage though, because your bandwidth allocation on the router, the amount of data it can transfer in or out in 1 second, depends on the actual number of bands that are active. So the 2.4 gigahertz band, its maximum transfer rate's around 600 megabits per second, whereas in the 5 gigahertz bandwidth, you're going to find around 1.3, the 5 gigahertz bandwidth, you get a transfer rate of around 1.3 gigabits per second. So a lot more data, about twice the amount of data in the 5 gigahertz bandwidth or more. But to make things really confusing, when you look at the box, here's the box for the router that I own, they often do a combined total and tell you like, hey, this is dual band, so I can do 300 plus 1.3, and that makes 1600, but your devices actually can't use those at the same time. So really, you either get 300 or 1300, or you can split the devices in your house. So things like your cell phone or that have low data requirements can all go on the 2.4 gigahertz band, and things with high data requirements like say your gaming systems, or if you have a home network server or something like that, they can go up on the highest frequency bands, on the 5 gigahertz band, and that will help you kind of split that bandwidth up among all of your devices. The catch is that bandwidth is split among all of your devices. So the router can only talk to one device at a time. If the router has something what's called MIMO, multiple in, multiple out, it can talk technically to multiple devices at the same time or to one device over multiple bands. That's rare because the receiving devices have to be able to support it, though the absolute latest and very few routers implement this. It's part of the AC standards, the extended AC standards. They actually allow the router to decide which little section each, or which channel each device is going to get, so it can actually start splitting that bandwidth up a little bit more intelligently rather than having a queue of ins and outs. Most are what's called full duplex, so there'll be simultaneous out and in. They send and receive at the same time, which helps your speeds a lot. But overall, that's kind of what you're going to be looking at if you're buying a router, and looking at the different radio frequencies and what the data rates are, and that's how they relate to each other, and that's how you can plan for your house or plan for a wireless implementation, is looking at how many bands it has, what's the bandwidth allocated to each band, what am I probably going to be using. So in my house, I have all of my devices pretty much all on the 5 gigahertz band because I don't game, I don't do any of the really high intense networking stuff. Here I do some data transfer, so that helps a lot, but I'm usually not using the same bandwidth all at the same time. So I think only my Chromecast, because I have an older version of Chromecast and it only supports the 2.4 gigahertz band, so I think that is on the 2.4, but pretty much everything else is on my 5 gigahertz band. Other buzzwords that you're going to find when you're looking for routers. Beamforming. Beamforming is actually a really, really useful feature. I'm going to talk about antennas here in a minute, but what beamforming does is it allows the router to use multiple antennas when talking to your device. And what it does is, by adjusting the phase of the antennas, it can essentially point the Wi-Fi at your device instead of just having it kind of bleed everywhere into the air. It is more pointed at your device, and if your device can beamform, you can have a much, much more reliable transmission back and forth between your router and your device. You get a higher decibel level, which again I'm going to talk about later. Less attenuation. Give it a minute. I'm getting there. So beamforming is a buzzword, but it's also not a buzzword. It's a useful feature, especially if you're using the 5 gigahertz bandwidth, because it attenuates really quickly, which means you lose your signal faster than the 2.4. And so beamforming can really help, especially if you're only using a couple of devices with it. It'll allow you to get a more focused transmission of data to your device and back. So that really helps. Lastly, you might see a phrase or an acronym called DLNA, which stands for Digital Living Network Alliance. It's a standard of transmitting audio and video over the network. So if you want to be streaming to your television or to your Xbox or your PlayStation or whatever it is that you're streaming to, DLNA makes your media files network discovery. Most of those routers will have like USB ports on the back, so you can put music or movies or whatever on a hard drive, connect it to the network, and present it over DLNA to all of your devices, and then you can stream iTunes wherever you are. And so that's great. Lastly, this is a debatable issue, but a faster processor might give you a little bit better performance unless you're doing really high performing situations. So gaming is not really something that you need to worry about usually, as long as the processor can handle the switching traffic. Again, I don't want to talk about the routing side and the networking side, but as long as the processor can handle that, and they usually can, you should be okay. Really only need to worry about it if you know that it's going to be a problem, which means you've done your research and know what it makes a difference on, then do it. Otherwise, don't spend your money. So I've got all of the jargon and marketing and all the information about Wi-Fi routers out of the way, just so that you can kind of know more or less what they do and why you need them and what the advantages of the 5 gigahertz band or the 2.4 gigahertz band. So what I want to talk about is antennas and the positioning of the antennas and the positioning of the router in your house for the best possible Wi-Fi experience. Most people, and I do say this lovingly, most people don't know how to set up a router. That's okay, that's fine. Most people do not have enough routers in their house, or rather enough access points, enough physical devices broadcasting the radio signals. You should, if you're in a big house, you should have more than one. If you only have one, you probably don't have enough, especially with the number of devices you're doing. Count the number of devices. If you're using more than 5 devices per wireless router, like, yeah, it can technically support it, but you probably want to be adding in a new one and then connecting the routers together using an actual physical cable, either run through the walls or through the ceiling or floor or whatever. That's going to give you a huge advantage in speed by separating it because of that bandwidth issue I was talking about earlier. All the devices aren't hogging the bandwidth. The other thing that it does is if you have a multi-story house, you should have one Wi-Fi access point or Wi-Fi router per level. Okay, Wi-Fi tends to spread out in concentric circles. So I brought a little analog, meaning a stick. So we're going to imagine that this is an antenna. Antennas are fun or interesting or boring, depending on if you're not a nerd like me, because the radio signals largely travel perpendicular to the surface of the antenna. So the radio frequencies are going to come out in kind of a large, cylinder shape, radiating away from the center of the antenna, as well as a little bit coming straight out from the top of the antenna. So that shape, as it spreads out, is where your Wi-Fi communicates if you only have one antenna. Now, a lot of routers will have 2 antennas, and so if you have them both in the same direction like this, if you're using an older one with positionable antennas, like, that's not a good orientation because you're not helping anything. You can put one on a quarter angle, and then you can get a better phase between them because they're orthogonal, so they can cover a lot more area. Or you kind of set it up like bunny ears, where you get the kind of the nicer angle and you get a larger downward coverage. And the idea is that you want your antennas to more or less angle towards where the flat side of the antenna, the long part of the antenna, is pointed towards where your devices generally are going to be, so that this expanding cylinder of radio waves coming off of the antenna covers your devices better and you don't have to rely on reflections or refractions as much. With that, you do get reflections and refractions and interference. This is like light because it's all on the electromagnetic spectrum, so it can reflect off of walls. It's going to be attenuated by walls. Attenuation, by the way, that term that I've used more than once and said I would explain, it's the measurement of how much the signal degrades over time. All radio signals degrade over time with distance from the source until they eventually just become background noise. And there's actually a really useful term that describes what it is, and it's called the inverse square law. It basically means every time you double the distance, the power, it drops by a quarter. So that's the attenuation level. So when I take the wavelength of the radio, so the wavelength of 2.4 gigahertz is 12 centimeters. That's about here. So another 12 centimeters after that, I've lost 75% of the power. Like that's just the way that it works. So like 75% of the power, and then I double that, and I've lost 75% of what's remaining. Because that scale is logarithmic, we use decibels to measure the power rating on the antennas. So radio communications use the decibels. If you look on your phone, you're probably going to get it in dBm, negative dBm, which is the amount of decibels off of a single watt, a single milliwatt of power. So usually anywhere between minus 40 and minus 80-ish dBm is a really strong signal. You'll actually see that on your cell phone graphs as well. Your your signal strength is actually measured in these decibels. And if you're using like an Android phone like I am, there's apps that you can go in and actually see exactly how much signal strength you have. There's another app that I use called Wi-Fi. Oh my gosh, now I'm going to have to sit here and take like 2 minutes to look up with the app. It's called Wi-Fi Analytics. Wi-Fi Analytics, yes. Wi-Fi Analytics, I'm pretty sure you can get it on the iPhone as well. What it does is it'll allow you to actually like measure and graph and see all of the Wi-Fi in your area and see what channels they're on, so you can pick your best optimal channel away from the other frequencies so that you can get a less interference. It'll allow you to see your signal strength so you can walk around your house and find dead spots. It's really, really useful, not very intuitive, but it'll give you those readings to let you know how good your Wi-Fi is. So like I said, the 2.4 gigahertz at 12 centimeters and then at 24 centimeters, you have that 75% drop. The 5 gigahertz drops even faster because its wavelength is shorter. So at 6 centimeters, you have the first, here's whatever one level is, and then a quarter at 12 centimeters, and then 1/16 at the further distance. And that helps you know why 5 gigahertz radios have a lot shorter coverage. And that's why we're seeing actually more LTE cell phone towers, because they're using higher frequencies, and therefore you have a higher attenuation. Your walls, your pipes, everything, including dead space, the thickness of the walls, so like if you're using drywall over an air gap, like that attenuates less than if you had brick all the way through. All of these reduce the signal. So when you're setting up your Wi-Fi, what you don't want to do is put it in a corner of the house. You put it in a corner of the house and you have, maybe 270 degrees of radius where it's broadcasting outside your house versus the only 90 degrees in the center. You want to kind of find a central location, whether that's your living room or some place where it's kind of central to the house. You put it there, and what you're going to get is a better coverage because you have more of a circle's angles around it where you can connect to a device and have that line, essentially line of radio sight with the router. If you need to, like I said, put a second access point on a different floor. It helps so much with going through floors because these antennas are really, really radio. It's called anisotropic, meaning it's not broadcasting in all directions evenly. So around one axis it is, in this circular cylinder it is, but you don't get much top and bottom, and it's a fairly elongated toroidal shape as it expands out. You can get some antennas, if you really know what you're doing, that are what are called omnidirectional antennas. Essentially, you're using like multiple antennas kind of crossed in a way that it creates a much stronger toroid that will cover pretty much most areas. But ideally, what you want is multiple antennas that can cover and add together and point in all the different directions. So that is the radio frequency aspect of how Wi-Fi works. So if you're positioning it, how do you measure your attenuation? How do you deal with it? How do you make sure that it's going to work for you when you set it up? What type of router should you buy? Whatever is best for your needs. And then look at the features, knowing what they do, and decide if it's worth spending money on it for you. For me, I needed the higher speeds for some of my networking, but not too high of speeds. So I went with a great balance, in my opinion. So let me know what you think about Wi-Fi and any other technology concepts that you'd like me to cover here on Off the Cuff in the comments below. And if you are new to my channel, go ahead and subscribe to Tech Laboratories for weekly Off the Cuff videos and monthly videos on science and technology. And I will see you next time. And I have 8 seconds to spare on my camera roll.